She was standing by the window of a small cafe on Elm Street in the fall of 2019, and the light was hitting her hair in a way that made me forget I was 70 years old. Her name was Patricia. She had a laugh like something you hadn't heard in decades, warm and sudden, the kind that fills a room before you even realize it started. I remember thinking after all these years, here it is. Here is what I missed. I sat down across from her, ordered 2 coffees I didn't need, and made the biggest mistake of my life. I need to be clear with you right now. This is not a story about love being wrong. This is not a story about bitterness or regret toward another person. Patricia was not the mistake. I was. Every choice I made in that relationship, every illusion I dragged into it from 70 years of living wrong, everything I believed love was supposed to fix, that was the mistake. And I found out too late. Not too late to survive it. Too late to undo the damage I did to myself, to her, and to the people I had been ignoring for decades, while I chased the idea that one more beginning could save me from everything I had refused to finish. I was born in 1951 in a small town in Ohio called Bellefontaine. My father worked at a machine shop and never once told me he loved me. Not out of cruelty, I think, but out of a generation that believed love was something you showed by staying, not by speaking. I learned that lesson perfectly. I stayed in jobs I hated. I stayed in a marriage that had gone cold by 1987. I stayed silent when my children needed me to speak. And when my wife Eleanor passed away in March of 2016, after 31 years of a life we had built side by side and somehow never truly shared, I stayed alone for 3 years and called it healing. It was not healing. It was waiting. I was 73 years old, living in a 2-bedroom house in Columbus with a dog named Chester and a kitchen that still smelled faintly of Eleanor's rosemary chicken, and I was waiting for something to begin. Waiting for a reason to get dressed before noon. Waiting to feel like the years still ahead of me had any shape to them at all. I had money in the bank, a pension from 30 years of civil engineering, 2 adult children who called on Sundays, and a complete, consuming, terrifying emptiness that no amount of television or grandchildren's birthday parties could touch. That emptiness was the truth I had been running from since 1979. Let me tell you something about emptiness at 73. It does not feel the way it feels at 30. At 30, emptiness feels like a room waiting to be furnished. At 73, emptiness feels like a room where someone already removed everything piece by piece while you were too busy to notice. You walk through it, and you recognize the shape of what used to be there. You can see the marks on the floor where the furniture sat. You remember vaguely the color of the walls before they faded, but the room is bare now, and you have no idea when it happened, only that it did, and that you let it. Patricia and I met through a mutual friend in September of 2019. She was 68. She had buried a husband of her own 7 years earlier, raised 3 daughters in Portland, Oregon, and moved back to Columbus to be near her youngest grandchild. She was sharp, funny, honest in a way that caught me completely off guard. On our 4th evening together, she looked at me over a plate of pasta at a restaurant on 5th Avenue and said, "You have very sad eyes for someone who's smiling." I laughed. I changed the subject. I did not tell her that no one had noticed my eyes in 20 years. Let me free you from the story everyone tells about love at this age. People see 2 older individuals finding companionship, and they call it beautiful. They call it a second chance. They call it proof that it is never too late. And maybe, for some people, it is all of those things. But for me, it was a disguise. It was the most sophisticated form of avoidance I had ever constructed, because instead of sitting alone in that empty room and asking myself how it got that way, I filled it with Patricia. I filled it with dinners and phone calls and the electricity of something new. I used her warmth to avoid my own cold. And I did it with a smile on my face and genuine feeling in my chest, which made it almost impossible to see. By January of 2020, we were spending 4 nights a week together. By March, the world shut down and suddenly we were spending every night together, in her apartment on Broad Street. 2 old people in a pandemic, cooking together, watching the news with our hands interlocked, keeping each other from the terror of solitude at the worst possible moment. It felt, I will be honest with you, like salvation. It felt like the universe had finally decided to be kind to me. Chester slept at the foot of her bed. Her coffee was always too strong. There was a crack in her bedroom ceiling shaped roughly like the state of Florida, and I stared at it every morning and thought, I am lucky. I thought, I deserve this. I did not deserve it. Not because I am a bad man, but because I had not done the work to receive it. I came to Patricia carrying 70 years of unprocessed grief, unfinished conversations with my father, unspoken apologies to my children, an entire architecture of emotional debt I had never once sat down to examine. And instead of examining it, I handed it to her in the form of need. Quiet, persistent, exhausting need. I needed her to make the emptiness stop. I needed her to be the proof that my life had not been a waste. I needed her to be the answer to a question I had never even properly formed. That is not love. That is bankruptcy presenting itself as affection. My daughter Rachel, who was 44 at the time and living in Denver with her own family, called me in June of 2020 and said, Dad, I feel like I don't know you anymore. I told her it was the distance. I told her it was the pandemic. I told her everything except the truth, which was that she had never fully known me because I had never fully known myself, and that I was now attempting to outsource the project of self-knowledge to a 68-year-old woman in Columbus, Ohio, who deserved far better than the assignment I had quietly given her. Patricia noticed before I did. She was always sharper than me, quicker to name what was real. In August of 2021, she sat me down on her couch, with Chester between us and the ceiling fan clicking the way it always did in summer, and she said something I will carry for the rest of my life. She said, You love me because I make you feel less afraid, and I love you enough to tell you that is not enough. I sat there for a long time. The fan clicked. Chester breathed, and I understood, in a way I had never understood anything before, that she was right. She was completely, unsparing, precisely right. We ended things in October of 2021, not in anger, not with cruelty, but with the kind of sorrow that comes when 2 people see each other clearly and realize the timing was all wrong, not in the calendar sense, but in the interior sense. I was not ready. Not at 70, not at 73, not even at the moment we said goodbye. I was a man who had spent his entire life building things on the outside and neglecting everything within. A career, a house, a reputation, a family in the structural sense, all of it solid and visible and completely hollow at the center. It is all garbage, everything you accumulate, if you accumulate it while running from yourself. Every promotion, every finished project, every Sunday dinner where everyone was present and no one was truly there. I built a life the way you build a stage set. Perfect from the audience, nothing behind the flats. And at 73 I walked a real woman onto that stage and expected her to feel at home, and she was too honest and too wise to pretend that she did. The tragedy was not the death of the relationship. The tragedy was the 60 years before it. The tragedy was my son Michael, who is 47 now and who I know with a certainty that sits in my chest like a stone, has learned my same patterns and is living my same life in a different decade. The tragedy was Eleanor, my wife, who I believe loved me in the only way she knew, and whom I honored with presence but not with honesty. Not once. Not ever. The tragedy was the version of myself I abandoned in about 1974. A 32-year-old man who was beginning to feel something real and got scared and covered it with work and routine and the comfortable numbness of a life that looked correct. There is no later. That is the sentence I wake up with every morning now. I am 74 years old at the time I am recording these words, living back in my house on Westview Drive, with Chester, who is very old now, and walks slowly, with Rachel calling on Sundays and occasionally on Tuesdays too, since I started being honest with her, with a journal I have been keeping since November of 2021 that already fills 2.5 notebooks. I do not have a girlfriend. I do not have a plan to find one. I have, for what feels like the first time in my adult life, a daily practice of sitting in the empty room and asking myself how it got this way, and staying long enough to hear the answer. Nobody is watching you. That is the other sentence. No one is watching you grieve. No one is watching you examine your failures. No one is holding a scorecard of your emotional progress. The fear that kept me performing instead of living. The fear that if I stopped moving and building and achieving, the people around me would see through the stage set. That fear was based on a lie I told myself in 1967 and never questioned again. You are not being watched. You are free to stop. You are free to sit in the empty room and mourn everything that was lost while you were too busy to notice. We are all going to die. I say that not to frighten you, but to free you. Because for most of my life, the awareness of my own death produced in me an anxious productivity, a compulsive forward motion, as though if I stopped to feel anything, I would be overtaken by the ending. But the truth is the opposite. The awareness of death, when you stop running from it and actually let it land, becomes the clearest possible argument for presence. Not for urgency in the frantic sense, but for attention, for showing up to the actual life you are living, not the life you are constructing to convince yourself and others that you are fine. I have 3 things I want to give you before I stop. Not advice in the prescriptive sense. 3 actions. The first is this. Go find the oldest photograph you have of yourself before you became who you decided to be. For me, it was a photograph from the summer of 1968, a 17-year-old kid in Bellefontaine, Ohio, standing in front of a lake with no particular expression, just existing. Look at that person, speak to them, tell them what they are about to spend the next several decades doing. And notice what you feel when you do. That feeling is information. The second, write down 1 sentence that you have never said to someone you love. Not a speech. 1 sentence. Write it on a piece of paper, fold it, put it in your wallet or your pocket, and carry it until you understand why you have never said it. You will know when you understand. Your body will tell you before your mind does. Mine was 4 words long, and it took me 3 months of carrying it before I finally said it to Rachel on the phone on a Tuesday morning in February of 2022. And she went completely quiet for about 8 seconds. And then she said, "I know, Dad. I know." That 8 seconds was worth more than all of 1997. The third, stop filling the empty room. Whatever you are using to fill it, whoever you are asking to stand in it and make it feel less empty, stop. The room is empty because something important was removed. Your job is to find out what it was, not to replace it with the next available warmth. The room can stay empty for a while. You can survive the emptiness. You cannot survive another decade of furnished avoidance. Patricia is well, as far as I know. I think of her often, not with regret in the romantic sense, but with a gratitude that is almost painful in its specificity. She saw me more clearly in 2 years than I saw myself in 7 decades. Chester is lying at my feet as I write this. It is a Thursday in November. The house smells like coffee and old wood. Outside, the leaves are almost gone from the maple in the front yard, which Eleanor planted in 1991 from a sapling the size of her forearm. The tree is enormous now. She never saw how big it got. I found love at 70 and it showed me everything I had refused to see for 50 years. The mistake was never Patricia. The mistake was arriving at her door carrying the weight of a life I had never properly examined and expecting her to make it lighter. Do not make my mistake. Do not wait until 70 to sit in the empty room. The room has been waiting for you for years. The door is unlocked. Go in.